Welcome back to another episode of MedTech Trends. I'm your host, Dorian. So today we're joined by three guests. So we have Vineet Johnson, who is the president and CEO of IRegained. He is a neuroscientist and a physiotherapist by training, and he brings a few decades of experience with him into this new venture. He's been in an academic setting, clinical and research settings as well, both in Canada, the UK, and in India. We also have Samir Sahu, who's joining us as the Chief Operating Officer. He has also a couple of decades of experience. He's an engineer by training, but has also spent his time doing business development, product development, launching new products, and jumping into new technologies all around the world, including Canada and the US. And last but not least, we have Joel Lederman, who is the Director of Corporate Development at IRegained. Joel is bringing with him nearly 50 years of experience in high technology, leading companies, building companies across various industries. And of course, he's got a very, very strong venture capital background. So we're very glad to have the three of you come on the show today.
Thank you.
Awesome. So just to let everybody know a little bit about the company. So IRegained is a digital neurotherapeutics company that is developing a clinically validated, therapist-directed, smart, in-home digital rehabilitation device that empowers chronic stroke and traumatic brain injury survivors to reclaim unassisted use of their upper extremities, including hand usage. It has a very interesting technology. It's called MyHand system. We'll talk quite a bit more about that. Now, just to give everybody a sense of scale here before we dive into some of the details of how this company came to be, we're talking about stroke patients and traumatic brain injury patients. The numbers are really high, drastically high. So we're talking about 60,000 people in Canada alone, 700,000 or nearly 800,000 people in the US. And then we're talking about a global scale, well over 1 million people are having strokes every year. So there are tons and tons of people that can actually benefit from this technology. And the interesting thing, I think, to me was when I was reading up on this is that there has not been that much improvement in the therapeutic landscape, post-trauma therapy landscape in the last couple of years. So this is something I also wanted to touch on. Just to start off here, I wonder if you guys can take me a little bit through, how the company got started. How did the founders meet?
Thank you very much for the fantastic introduction, Dorian. Much appreciated. The two founders are Ranjit Stanley and myself. We go back 35 years. We went to the same Sunday school, same university, played in the same soccer team. It so happened because we were at the same university, we had the distinct privilege of working with a gentleman by the name Dr. Marcus Devanandan, who had extensive training in the world of neuroscience and whose specialty was to work on hand function control. But most of his research work was around primates or monkeys, which sparked this whole interest of trying to understand how does the brain control the hand and why does it control and what happens when you lose control, like in a stroke or a brain injury. And in that context, Ranjit and me got very excited by this whole world of the word control, because we all talk about control in many ways, but the control for the hand is so unique. It's just fascinating to see how the brain controls it. You have like about 25 different joints in your hand. You have like 35 different muscles. And this combination somehow plays around in various permutation combination and allows you to pick up a needle from the floor and also allows you to pick up a 100-pound suitcase. That's how unique the hand is. It can do millions of different things, and that is where our fascination started. And Ranjit and me are probably the longest standing friends, both from the clinical academic side of things, and I've been friends for many, many years.
As a physiotherapist, I imagine you probably had to deal with quite a few stroke patients, among others, that need this type of work. So what sparked the idea then of focusing on stroke populations and that this is a group that has a high unmet need, and where there's really strong potential for innovation, bringing technology into the market that can help a lot of people?
So as a practicing clinician in the mid-90s back in India, we were in a resource-constrained environment. Today's India's economy is roaring. Back then it wasn't. And as a clinician, I worked predominantly with people with neurological disorders, which ranged from stroke, neuromuscular disorders, traumatic brain injuries, a breadth of them. And what was really weird about the whole thing was, even back then, therapy largely focused on standing, walking, and balance training. The hand itself, it was very complicated. So in the limited sessions that patients had with the clinicians, it was really ignored. People would try spending a little bit of time. There are publications out there. I think some publications indicate a max per session, patients get 4 to 5 minutes hand function therapy. And that's today. So back 25 years ago, that was the state. 25 years later, today you could stand in the middle of a soccer field and order a pizza, and like 100 different companies will fight to get you that pizza. But when someone gets a stroke, literally everybody drops the ball. And that's kind of what really sparked the idea. And I would probably say it's the same thing with Joel, why Joel is working with us, same reason why Samir is working with us. It's just that we are unable to understand why there is this huge gap, and we want to fill that gap. And in a large extent, this is a social impact venture. It's a for-profit, but it's a social impact venture to fill that void so that those individuals, just like us, can go and live an independent life instead of being dependent on someone else for their everyday activities of daily living, like simple things like holding a coffee mug, putting on your clothes. They're dependent on someone else, and we want to change that. We want to allow them the opportunity to reclaim their life, reclaim their independence. And that's kind of where the bigger picture.
The social impact part of this is definitely something that attracted me to have this conversation and have you guys come on to tell us a little bit about this. And of course, the sheer number of patients that are impacted by this every year, and still don't have that solution. In today's day and age, with so like, it's not that the technology isn't there; it just hasn't been actually put into practice and really kind of commercialized. And on that point, I'm really curious. Samir, we had a conversation before this one just to get introduced here, and you told me a little bit about your background. You've worked in a lot of different industries, and you have a strong tech development background, and now you've kind of transitioned into a strong healthcare setting. Obviously, there's a lot of work to be done and a lot of ideas to be borrowed from other tech verticals, if you will, into healthcare. That most of the innovation in healthcare, frankly, comes from ideas borrowed from other verticals. And I wonder if I can, what's your perspective on this, and how did you decide to, I guess, make that transition into healthcare to join this team?
Very good question, and thank you. You're absolutely right. I started my career in the oil and gas industry with Chevron. Basically, when I was a bachelor, I was traveling around the world and getting paid for it on a big ship, taking oil from one place to another. It was fun, but as a marine engineer, one thing I learned is to be resourceful, and the opportunity to work with all kinds of technology, ranging from electronics to electricals to heavy machineries to engines, generators, air compressors, all kind of technologies that I got familiarized with. And the one thing that I would say is really something good about marine engineers is they're like a jack of all trades. They're good at connecting dots. They may not be expert in any one thing, but they're really good at connecting the dots, fixing problems, finding solutions in really resource constrained places. There is no 911 on ships and you call and help comes in. You have to figure things out by yourself. So pretty much, that is something I learned and took over. And as I did my master's in Purdue, I was working in the Purdue Discovery Park, which is basically an innovation center where students from Indiana University's medical program, which is very good, work with engineers from Purdue University and scientists from Purdue University. And I, as a business student, was working with both of them. My technical background basically landed in the benefit of understanding what they're trying to do to an extent where I can speak layman's language to, let's say, an investor or in a pitch competition and raise some cash and commercialize the technology. So that's where my skill set lies. And when I started that journey, I never looked back. Basically, the healthcare industry gave me that satisfaction that yes, I'm doing something technical that I'm passionate about, something engineering that I've always been passionate about, but also it is helping people. It's making an impact on the society. It is giving an altruistic purpose, so to say, in my life essentially, and it gives me a sense of meaning to what I'm doing. And since that was in 2008 when I started, and ever since it's almost 12 years now, or more than 12 years, and I've been in the healthcare industry, both in small companies, starting at Purdue, and then worked in large corporations like Zimmer Biomed, and then more recently moved back into the innovation space at Mars Discovery District and Mars Innovation, and now at IRegained. You rightly said, a lot of technologies, for example, in this device itself, like actuators, for example, or electronics, for example, they can be inherited from other industries, consumer products, or electronics industry, or aerospace, and so forth. But here they are put in a way that they serve the purpose in helping stroke patients. That's the ultimate mission. And this technology is enabling stroke patient to regain that function. And you almost like I can't explain it, but you have to see it in the eyes of the stroke patients when they have no motion. And after doing a couple of sessions, one or two of their fingers move, and you see that emotion in their eyes, and that's what motivated me and every person in our team, basically. So there you see the impact, and there's no words to explain that, but that's the feeling that you get.
It's a beautiful thing. There are a couple of videos on your website and I think on your YouTube channel as well. So uh, you can essentially look at testimonials and actually look at patients who have gone through studies that you guys have done. We'll see if we can link to those in the description once this is up. And I'd love to touch on some of the studies that have been done so far and some of the outcomes that you've been able to measure to look at the effectiveness and cost effectiveness too of this product. One last question here, because I'm actually really curious too. How did the two of you meet? How Samir, you and Vineet, how did you guys end up coming together for this project?
I should ask Joel to say that,
Yes.
explain that part.
So yeah, I was kind of smiling, and you noticed that when you asked that question, Dorian. I mean, I've been in the tech space for a long time, as you said, spent a good number of years at an organization called Mars Innovation, which is actually charged with helping to spin off technologies out of the hospitals and universities in the Toronto area. Did a lot of work in the area of healthcare, very passionate about that. Much like Samir said, really want to help people. There's all kinds of things that we can do as engineers, but if you can take your engineering talents and turn that to help people to live better lives, that's really a compelling thing. In terms of how we all came together, basically I had retired from Mars Innovation, ostensibly with a goal of spending more time with my wife, kids, grandkids. I'm not the kind of guy that can sit on my hands, and so I knew that I wanted to stay involved in early stage companies, specifically healthcare related. And so I was introduced to Vineet. He asked me whether I could help get the company going, help with organizing the research and development plan, a bit of project management and fundraising. And so I began to work with the company. Back in my days at Mars Innovation, Samir and I had the opportunity and pleasure of working together. And so one of the things that I did was to basically say to Vineet, you really do need a good hands on the ground, solid chief operations officer. And I know just the right guy to do that. His name's Samir. Introduce them, and then I guess, as they say, the rest is magic. And the three of us have been working together for pretty close to 3 years now. Tough times. I mean, we have been faced with funding challenges. We've been faced with COVID-19 restrictions on being able to work in the same office. Our clinical development program, which we actually launched in February of 2020, got curtailed after about 2 weeks because of COVID-19 related shutdowns. And what is remarkable is the perseverance of the team who managed to continue to figure out how to work together remotely. Our office is kind of an interesting place. Only a limited number of people were able to come in at a certain time in order to respect the regulations that we had. And yet the team managed to persevere. We've continued to work at setting up opportunities to work together with stroke patients to help them at the same time while we are helping them, because we're bringing them in as kind of volunteers, and they get some sessions with our system. We get the benefit um, of their using our device and giving us feedback on how we can use it better. It's a great symbiotic relationship where we're very focused on following a parallel path of product development and customer development, meaning that we're not going to sit all by ourselves and develop something and then throw it out there and say, okay, guys, is this going to work? We're working with patients, we're working with clinicians. We have a substantial number of very high profile clinical collaborations, which will hopefully in the next weeks, once COVID-19 restrictions in Canada are lifted, we'll be able to operationalize those again and move on with the studies. That's a very long answer. I know the question was, how did we come together? But the passion just comes across in what we're doing. And I just had to share.
There's an interesting tidbit in that. So right after Joel suggests Samir, Joel sends a text message to Samir, what do you know about stroke? And Samir was holidaying in India. And that's where the conversation started. Just thought I should throw it in there.
Yeah, out of the blue, I get a call from Joel. And what do you know about
stroke? The message said, what do you know about stroke?
Okay, so now I'm really curious. What was the response initially? I love how this happens serendipitously, right? I mean, you never know.
Yeah.
What was your response?
So I paused for a moment, and first of all, the thought that was going on my mind is maybe somebody got a stroke, and I was a little worried. And then and then I realized, okay. Then he starts asking by saying, okay, do you know about stroke recovery, rehabilitation, or treatment, any of that, any companies in that space? Then I realized, okay, he's talking about the technology side. So yeah, I know I had worked at Mars, and Mars has, like I said, had about 300 or so healthcare companies, and one among many others, there was one company that is a prominent one in the Toronto landscape that I worked closely with. The founder I know, the name of the company is Mind Tech, and it's out of Toronto Rehab. So I basically told Joe, look, pretty much in my exposure, this is the company I know, this is what they're doing, and they're using stimulation as a technique. And I know the founder, he has done a couple of pitches at Mars. And I think I like his technology and whatnot. And so from there on, the conversation went, and we went into a deep dive. What are the fundamental differences and so forth? This was a very good learning process for me as well, to dive deeper into the whole landscape, because there are so few companies doing anything in that space. And so as I dug deeper into that space, I realized uh, most of the solutions out there do not work, unfortunately. They have the right intentions, but the efficacy is not there, and the approach is different. So as I realized that, I dug more into IRegained, and it was quite a process. Initially, I would say I was very skeptical, because knowing that this problem is big, and there is, first of all, I was skeptical that there is a lot of big funding, like Heart and Stroke Foundation, there is DOD, brain injury, concussion, all those are like big funded sort of areas of research, but no real good solution exists, and the space is just wide open and with unmet clinical needs. Then on top of that, whatever is out there had other than like advertisements from those companies, you wouldn't see any independent publications that show the patient really improved. So I thought, okay, this approach looks very different, and it's an opportunity for me to also use everything I've learned in business development, in technology, in marketing, anything and everything, to bring this technology to market. So basically, again, it's a long-winded question, but it ended up in that way. So we had an interview internally, and then it kind of come to fruition.
Really interesting stuff. So ultimately, all this was kind of brought back to Mars Innovation. I think it's still called Mars Innovation. I could be wrong about that, but back to Toronto, and a couple conversations later, it turned into IRegained. And as you're just saying, there was a bit of a competitive landscape done. Not much on the market to actually solve this problem for stroke patients, and so this idea was something that could really make an impact here. And I wanted to come back to the topic of COVID and how that's affected development and launching and probably commercialization, especially as things are opening up now. We'll come back to that a little bit later. I really wanted to dive into, at this point, the product itself. Where was it developed in terms of hospital affiliations, that sort of thing, or where is it ongoingly being developed? And then the device itself, I believe, went through a prototype initially, because there's a video sort of showing what the early prototype looked like. And then I also see a picture in your backgrounds right now. So it's really interesting to see what the, pre-commercialization version of this will actually look like. So let's walk through that. What happens when a patient has a stroke, and then what's the exact sort of problem that's being tackled right now with the product?
I'm going to split it up into two parts. I'm going to talk about the science side and ask Samir to talk about the engineering side. So we're in a very simple nutshell, when someone gets a stroke, a part of the brain is damaged. And if that part of the brain controls your hand, then your hand doesn't work. Majority of patients, approximately 70% of people who get a stroke, have varying level of hand function paralysis. So what really happened is, there's nothing wrong with the hand. It's the hand is what it is. But the connection from the brain to the hand is lost. So those command signals, or in the modern world, you could say the software that used to be installed to create those command signals, are not generated anymore. So a solution to that problem has to arise from, how do you create a new software? How do you restore this? And it comes from a very fundamental philosophy called neuroplasticity. Originally in the late 1800s, early 1900s, there was a Nobel laureate by the name Ramon Cajal, who originally coins this word neuroplasticity, or the brain's ability to learn and change. But it wasn't really very well applied to the landscape of rehab for many, many years. And if you really look at the academic literature, it's only in the late 1990s and early 2000s where it really captures the essence of the rehab world. A little bit was there in 80s and 90s. I think MIT had a device by the name MIT Manus. I think early 80s, they tested it on primates and humans. But the buzz itself really catches in the late 90s and then early 2000s. And the simple answer to your larger question is, how do patients get better? We try to help them form new circuitry around the damaged area of the brain, so that this new circuitry can compensate for the lost function. In other words, if they were not able to lift a coffee mug because of the stroke, we want to help them get back to lifting a coffee mug. And we at IRegained take a very function-oriented approach, because patients don't care if the device looks cute and sexy and awesome. What they really want is, I cannot do anything with my hand. I want to be able to. And it could be simple as, I want to brush my own teeth. I want to do my own toileting. I want to be able to put on my own clothes. I don't want to be dependent. And that's what we focus on as a company. Every bit of our therapy focuses purely on function, in helping patients gain certain functions so that they could live their life independently. Samir, would you talk a little bit about the engineering side of things to give a broad overview on that?
So the device is an enabler for the patient to achieve the ultimate goal of regaining function. And the way we do that is, in the science, there is intensity and repetition. Those are the two key words to gaining function. Think of like a baby that is trying to hold a spoon. They will make a number of mistakes, but they will keep attempting and keep attempting. Ultimately, at one point, you'll see they're holding the spoon. So the brain learns by repetition and intensity and making mistakes and learning from those mistakes. So the device itself is allowing that to happen by a very precision control mechanism that accurately measures every movement and gives a feedback. And then we use our sophisticated algorithms, which are basically clinical protocols embedded into a software in the system that allows the patient to visually give them an indication how they're doing and what they're doing, and use those little movements. Like if they're able to move 2 millimeters, the system takes that into account and accommodates to that need. And based on that movement, after repetition and intensity going through our system, either through our protocols or we have made it even more exciting through games, either way, they will increase that 2 millimeter to 4 millimeter to 6 millimeter, ultimately gaining function both in the range and then force and control. So, all those parameters are improved. And think of this device as, I don't want to say in a very complicated way, but basically like a watch. A watch is a very precision control instrument. It is similar to that in sense, like it is very precise instrument. It is also portable, and we took into account not just the functionality of it, which is important. Like, you need to be able to use that device to regain function, but you also need to take into account the condition of the stroke patient. There are certain factors which are very unique to stroke patients than an able-bodied person. And this is something we learned through trial and testing and user cases and all of that. Because stroke patients, because they're not using their hand, for example, their shoulder could be a little subluxated, or partially, lower, or they may not be able to move their hand forward, or their hand may not be able to open up. So those are different factors we took into consideration. Both from clinicians we took inputs, and from patients we took inputs in focus groups, and designed the system with the right amount of degrees of freedom, with the right amount of orientation, shape, and size. All of that was done through those studies to ultimately come up with a device that patients would want to keep in their home and use it on a daily basis and be motivated in using it. And ultimately, through that repetition and intensity, they will regain their neuronal circuits, the connection from the distal upper extremity to the brain, and be able to achieve the functions that they want to do.
Just quickly to add something, every aspect, right from software, industrial design, the engineering, every single aspect of it was literally, the information was fed in by the patients. It's kind of like the word democracy, for the patients, by the patients, right? And that allows every patient to be able to use. So every single member of the team, we've got an engineering team, we've got a software, firmware team, a gamification team, a design team, a clinical team. Everybody on a regular basis comes into contact with the patient. And Joe likes to use the word right from the start, build a little, test a little. And that's what we do. We build a little, we make mistakes, we learn from those mistakes. The patients would test it out and they'll say, oh, this is not working, this is great. And you take it from there. So eventually you produce a product that patients want, not what we as clinicians or we as engineers or we as programmers want. Right? And that provides an efficacious device, in our opinion.
So very, very much developed in concert with patients, providing feedback on the through the development, and clinicians. Okay, really interesting to know. Now, just like, so let's say practically speaking, how this would actually be used in a clinical setting. So, a stroke patient has a stroke. Hopefully, they take an ambulance to a hospital. They stay in the hospital for a little while, and then at some point they go through, let's say, an outpatient ward, and then back into the community, back at home, maybe with some medications, but then they're hopefully also prescribed, or at least have the ability or the intention to go to rehabilitation centers to do physio and to do extra testing and that sort of thing. I think that's the general kind of patient journey. Or correct me if I'm wrong.
You're absolutely right, but there are some interesting nuances into that. The journey is simple. from the ambulance, they go to the hospital, they're medically managed. They may be in the hospital a week or two, and then they either move to a subacute center or they're sent home. And if you look at the course of therapy, like actual physical and occupational therapy that they receive, for the first 2 to 3 months, they hardly get any hand function therapy. But they get lots of standing, walking, and balance training. Because if you think of it, hospitals wants you to vacate the bed as fast as possible because being in the hospital is expensive. So that is the larger focus. And also the fact that hand function is very complex. It's not as simple as standing, right? So that's one aspect of the problem. The second problem, I think Samir alluded to a very interesting point. Literally seconds after an injury to the brain, from a stroke or any kind of injury, the circuit starts to change. In other words, the earlier you provide therapy, the better are your results. And the fact that the first 2 to 3 months, they hardly get any therapy, and that's according to published research, the prognosis kind of is not that good. So in terms of our device, who will use it? Clinicians initially will use it on their patients. And as patients firsthand feel the benefits of it, wants to take a device home, and through the various third-party payers, that process could be facilitated. Once they take the device home, the clinician can remotely provide the therapy. The advantage is here for the clinician. In a given 1 hour time, currently they may see 1 or 2 patients. In this case, if they're going to do by telemedicine, they could see multiple patients. So clinician provides greater amount of care. The insurance company or the provider generates more revenue. The cost of care goes down for the insurance company. And from a patient point of view, if you really think of it, as one hour physiotherapy, if you're going to do out of pocket, it's like $100. But the example I always like to give is if you want to become a tennis player, you never knew how to play tennis. For you to get from zero to amateur status, you should spend 20 to 40 hours a week. But if you go for 20 to 40 hours at the rate of $100 an hour to a physiotherapy clinic, that's $2,000 to $4,000 a week, which is just not affordable. But you put a device like this at home and put the device on a lease like $250 or $300 a month, and the patient can use it as many hours as possible. On one side, access to therapy significantly goes up. On the other side, intensity of practice goes up significantly. And anytime they need access to a clinician, they don't have to drive a car, get somebody else to drive them to a clinic or catch a cab. They can just sit at home, click the button, camera turns on, and the clinician appears, and there you go. So it's kind of made like a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, if I can just pick up on one point that Vineet was saying, and a question that you asked, Dorian, you talked about the patient journey. Those of us that don't have a stroke and don't have mobility impairments sort of take for granted that we can pick ourselves up and go to a clinic. We knew right from the very beginning that the patients who most need this have mobility challenges. And so from the very beginning of conceiving of the device, we looked at this as a home use type of system, again, under the supervision of a competent rehabilitation therapist. But the idea was that people could use this at home, as Vineet says, much more intensely than they can by going to a clinic once or twice or 3 times a week. Coming back to COVID-19, the impact of that on people has been devastating in many areas, including people who have had a stroke and are really precluded from, or have been precluded from, going to the clinic and are still at kind of high risk. And so this whole notion of designing and building a system that's useful both in the clinic and at home for a patient to use on their own under the supervision of a therapist was just something that was a major goal for us. And when we talk to therapists about that, their eyes light up. I mean, they basically say, we understand intensity is important, and we want our patients to be able to do exercises at home that will contribute to their getting better and recovering hand function. I just wanted to reinforce that particular point.
That is an important point. There's a couple things I want to also kind of reiterate and follow up on from there. The So Vinny, you touched on the fact that a lot of rehabilitation science, if you will, and actual practice in real life has focused for decades on getting people to deal with the larger kind of mobility issues, standing up, being able to balance properly, walk, and that sort of thing. Nowhere near as much focus on how to rehabilitate the hand function, hand movement, and also touching on the impact that COVID has had. I imagine that a lot of the rehabilitation when it comes to staying up and being able to move again, that typically happens in a clinical setting. The hand rehabilitation aspect of it, that can happen in either home settings with telemedicine sort of monitoring and assistance from a clinician, or it can happen in an actual clinic setting as well. It's kind of interesting, kind of twist there, because there's still not much to help patients in their own home when it comes to being able to help with the walking aspect of rehab. I thought that was kind of a contrast there that's worth pointing out. So really great that it was designed intentionally with this goal in mind, patients be able to use it at home. And one of the things that kind of comes to mind here also is so frequency, intensity, big part of progress towards restoring complete function in the hand. How, staying on the topic of neuroplasticity and using that as the core sort of philosophy of how the device is developed, how permanent are the results? And well, how quickly can a patient actually restore function to a satisfactory level? And then how permanent are the results?
Since we've had some patients work with us as part of research project and as part of our user trials, I'm going to use the exact results, actual results we have. So tomorrow, if you come back, we can show you who the patient is. Right? In the clinical research project that we had, one of these individuals went back to work. He used to be a HVAC technician, and he's now gone back to work. We did not follow up on our patients after the study, so we accidentally found out about this 3 years later. In other words, whatever benefit this individual got, they kept and retained over time. A second example is from an individual here in the city where I live. We started working with this individual for about 3 months. In the 3 months, we had about 10 or 11 sessions between August and November of 2019. And around November, this individual has a fall. People with a stroke usually fall because on one half of the body is paralyzed and the hand is not functional. It cannot hold on to things. You and I, if we're about to fall, a hand stretches out, supports yourself, or tries to hold something, and they can't do that. So this individual had a fall and went into long-term care. And long story short, by February of 2021, this individual came back home. And since we are now starting to recruit participants for our research study, we had contacted this individual because we had already received consent to contact them. So I had gone down to give them the little document which says the dates and times and all this preliminary information. And because of COVID, I did not want to go into their house to say hello. So I stood at the door and gave her the document to this lady's husband. And lo and behold, I hear someone walking. So she was in her bedroom. She dragged herself out of bed, got on her walker, came all the way to the entrance. And she looks up at me and she says, "How dare you? How dare you not say hello to me?" And I said, "I'm really sorry, because of COVID, I didn't want to come in." And she put her hands up. She said, "Thanks to you, I can still do this." In other words, a year and a half had gone by, and she had retained whatever skill set she gained with the use of the time that we spent with her. We are hoping to start working with her again once the COVID restrictions are removed, and help her get much better. And she's a classic example, but we really have to use empirical data to say that. Whatever I said to you is anecdotal. So we've got quite a few projects that are lined up. which are going to look at those aspects and say definitively there is an empirical evidence for this. Number two, as part of one of our projects, we're also developing our artificial intelligence system. As you notice, your hand's got like 25 joints and 35 muscles. And then we want to know exactly what is doing what. And how is progress happening? How is progress defined for different people? Because not all human beings are the same. Not all strokes are the same. And when we can track these things, it will give clinicians a really good diagnostic criteria, but clinicians will also get good prognostic criteria. So based on a patient's performance, they could speed up the performance, slow down the performance based on the needs, and also fine tune to their function. So you personalize the therapy to the individual as much as possible.
I want to come back to the topic of personalizing the therapy. Samir, you definitely talked a little bit about how the software itself is very responsive to the feedback that individual patients are giving it as they're going through and actually using it therapeutically. So we'll come back to the software just for a second. It is one of the essential components of the product itself. But since we also touched a little bit on studies that are ongoing or will be recruiting quite a bit more, I wonder if you can describe a little bit, who are the key patient populations? Does age make a difference here? Does community versus hospital setting make a difference here? Who's the target patient population?
The interesting thing is that if you look at some of the other systems that are out there, they're basically looking at people or looking at treating people who are what we call high functioning, people who already have some movement. What's remarkable about the IRegained MyHand system is that it is capable of assisting people who have high functioning hands or medium functioning or low functioning hands. So really what we're looking for, especially important in terms of our clinical validation trials, is a cross-section of patients who have different hand pathologies. Mostly what we're looking for are people that are really committed and eager to get better. Because a lot of the success, especially when we look at putting systems in homes, is going to be how frequently people use it. As Vineet made the point very articulately, the more you use it, the more rapidly you will recover, and conceivably, the more completely you will recover. And so that's what we're looking for. We're also looking, and I think it's important, again, to your listeners, those of your listeners who are running rehab clinics or long-term care homes, we're definitely looking for early adopter partners that are prepared to work with us, to use our system with their patients and basically help us not just to collect data on efficacy, but also, as we had mentioned earlier, by using the system with patients, we are getting really valuable feedback that's helping us to fine-tune the way the system works with people. I think in an earlier dialogue, we mentioned to you that we have 16 hand training protocols, which are really algorithms that are built into the system to help people to achieve certain activities of daily living, as Vineet says, holding a pen, holding a coffee mug, and so on. And those protocols, some of them have many, many hundreds of steps. And we need to continue to refine those protocols so that they move people from where they are to where they want to be more rapidly and more effectively. So we're going to continue to fine tune those. And the best way to do that is with clinicians that are committed to working with their patients and patients that are committed to getting better and being prepared to try new ways of recovery.
The activities of daily living is what I keep coming across in my reading of what stroke patients can really benefit from, and so these are, returning hand function. We take it for granted. We talked about this, that it's just so important in everything that we do on an everyday basis. So I see that as a point for testing this and getting feedback from patients who have that level of stroke severity impact, and are super motivated to get some of that functioning back. And I almost sense that maybe because there's such a long history of there not being something on the market available, that maybe, well, a lot of people a lot of people are not even going to be aware that this is possible, but I sense that might impact motivation to find people that are actually motivated to test out something that can really benefit them. It'll almost be like getting over the hump of, we have to explain that, yes, there is a therapy on the market available for people to actually use, and we're testing and developing it as we go. Really important
Right
point.
on the word motivation there.
Mm-hmm.
Two factors here. Traditionally, when someone gets a stroke, because they don't get a lot of therapy, they don't go out anywhere because their disability limits them from going out. Their motivation goes into the negative scale, which has negative consequences because now they're going to lead a sedentary life. They're going to be at home with very little social life. But on the other side, if you improve the hand function, like what we try to do, they can increase motivation and go out more. And on that note, on our system, we have these algorithms that provide these exercise regimen, like an exercise program. Alternatively, for each of those 16 protocols, there's a whole bunch of games that they can download. So that motivation motivates them even more. Pick up a bunch of eggs and fill up a tray of eggs, or pick up an arrow and shoot it into a little bullseye. Any number of types of games, but then the goal is to work on that motivation side of things, because that's a very, very important part. It also helps with engaging the patient, keeping them engaged so they're not bored after a period of time. Once they get addicted to the games and the therapy and they see the benefits, they automatically do. Right? Nobody has to tell them to get therapy. They automatically do the therapy. So sorry for interrupting you. I just thought I should pull the thread there.
No, it's really good. It almost reminded me also of anybody that, rehabilitation is a really broad category of therapies. Sometimes I forget just how big of a landscape that really is. I mean, a relative of mine had a spine surgery a couple of years ago. There's rehabilitation for that. There's physio for if you have a sprained ankle, that sort of thing. So all of this is about you have to be motivated to actually get that functioning back fully. And the same thing applies, I imagine, for stroke patients. To an nth degree, super important to get people motivated to do this sort of thing, and doing it from the comfort of your own home is going to be a big factor toward that. On the software piece, so you mentioned games. There's a bit of a gamification factor built into this as well. The software, I think, was developed completely in-house. This is IRegained, patented sort of software. Okay,
Yep.
Can we? How exactly does that work? What would it look like for a patient to actually use a device and sort of get that visual feedback?
So basically, the software is trying to automate the clinical protocols that are tied to 16 activities of daily living. So depending on the grasp that the person wants to do, for example, holding a coffee cup is a different type of grasp. Holding an umbrella is a different type of grasp, and the grasp is in a hierarchical way. So going from gross to fine, and increasing from strength to precision. So that's how it is structured. So you have to be able to do gross tasks first, and then you can progress on to more fine motor tasks. And the software is written to match those clinical protocols and automate those clinical protocols. And each of those protocols, like Joel said, is based on hundreds and hundreds of steps, very, very fine steps. And they're very granular in nature, and the software tries to recognize how you progressed, and then it will make a decision whether to move to the next step or whether to not move to the next step, or whether to skip a few steps and so forth. So it is programmed as a very sophisticated algorithm. And now, even with that, it is still sort of like a one size fits all kind of approach right now at this point. Now, as we collect more and more data, with our studies, with our volunteer patients, and as we do more pilots with our domestic and international collaborators, we'll gather a lot of data. We're already collaborating with Sunnybrook and Baycrest and McMaster University, and some of the studies will produce some very interesting data. And we're working with some specialists in the artificial intelligence or AI space, where they can look at the entire data collected, and basically the point that you're bringing up is personalize it even more, because every stroke patient, no matter what we say, is different. The damage is different. The duration from when they had a stroke to this point is different, and considering that into factor, we will have an AI engine that basically makes it even more precise in terms of predicting how they're going, and then automatically changing the protocol a little bit or making slight modifications here and there to address that particular patient's need. So, the fundamental difference, I know the one thing I'd like to bring is most of the technologies out there, you'll see they will use these key buzzwords. It's like AI or machine learning or, so on and so forth. The thing is, it is good to have those technologies, but technology is an enabler for the ultimate goal of getting patient benefit. Most companies, I'm not saying everybody does that, but they take an approach where they find the coolest and the greatest technologies, put something together, and hope it will achieve the result. Instead, we are taking the clinical pathway where we know the science, we know what result we want, and we didn't start with an AI. We are starting with the fact that let's have a basic software with basic algorithms that helps people get some results and produces some data. Then we will apply AI to make it more improved or optimized or more predictable, so on and so forth. So those technologies will come, but at the time when they're appropriate and ultimate goal of helping patients improve their function.
There's two things I want to quickly add to that. If you think of a sprinter getting trained, a 100-meter sprinter, the coach micromanages their training on a daily basis. We are doing the exact same thing for the hand. Now, for a sprinter, if you want to increase the muscle mass for the quadriceps, you just put them on a machine which has like 50 pounds, 100 pounds, or whatever the load they want to take. But for the hand, some tasks you need like a quarter gram, some tasks you need a few kilograms. So it has to be task-specific training, just like what the coach does to a sprinter. And that's what the software is doing here. And when we say steps, just like how the coach takes that sprinter through various aspects. If you think of a sprinter, they go through a rhythmic training, they go through strength training, they go to precision training. Like that, you have various segments for the hand too. And every little bit of that hand has to sync with that movement that they're trying to perform. Like if you want two fingers to do something, but if the other finger comes in between, you can't do the task. So our training will focus on each of those, and that's what the software does.
Vinita, I like how you took a turn towards the clinician perspective a little bit in there as well, kind of embodying the coach in this example. I think that's extremely important. I mean, this is something that, if it gets into whether it's in a clinical environment, in a rehab center type environment, a hospital, or in a patient's home, at the end of the day, the best way to do this would be to involve a clinician or maybe a team of clinicians to help patients. So offering value to clinicians is obviously a big part of the development and of the value at the end of the road as well. So I know we're running close to time here. There's one piece that I really wanted to touch on before we head out. Over the next year or so, maybe 1 or 2 years, what's going to be essential to get this fully developed, approved as needed, and kind of rolled out into the hands of clinicians and patients? What are the next couple of steps over the next year or so?
Yeah, that's a really good question. To bring any sort of product to market clearly requires money. We have been bootstrapping this company for some time. We have a number of angel investors that have stood with us and have facilitated what we're doing. We are really good at finding sources of non-dilutive funding, government grants and research grants for our partners. What we really need at this point is we need fuel in the tank. There's human fuel. We have an incredibly innovative, bright, and motivated team. Our engineering people, who should really be on this call because they deserve a huge amount of credit for all the work that they've done, are not getting sung about. You're just seeing our faces. But what we really need is investors who believe in us and who will help fund the company, because we will be successful. They will, as investors, have both the benefit of reward for their financial investment, but because we are a social impact company, they'll also hopefully recognize that by doing good, they're doing well. It's good for everybody. And so Any investors that are interested, obviously, our name is on screen. They can look at our website, www.iregained.ca, to find out more about us, and our contact information is there. As I said, we would welcome inquiries by potential investors and also by potential clinical partners who would like to work with us and bring our system into their clinic and expose their patients to it and help them along the way as well.
Clinical development is still very much underway. Obviously, that requires quite a bit of resources to put together. But I think there's a lot of interest out there. And again, the potential social impact and, real life impact on individual patients, people, is going to be huge down the road. There's so many that are actually affected by strokes every year. And that problem is only getting bigger. And there's not much out there to help these people to begin with. So I see this as filling a niche with a lot of unmet need. Again, really interesting approach here. I'd love to talk a lot more about the science, quite a bit more, and everything from a clinical perspective. Unfortunately, we only have so much time today. So for now, I will say thanks so much for everyone here, Joel, Samir, Vineet. Really appreciate your time this afternoon to talk a little bit about your company, IRegained. Look forward to having another conversation in the next couple of months, year or so, as things unfold. I think it'll be an interesting conversation to have.
And hopefully,
Thank you so much, Dorian, for your time.
We appreciate it. We'll try to do a demo in a subsequent conversation so people can see actually how it works.
I'd love that. That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much to all of you. We'll catch you next time.
Yeah, take care.
You.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Good day.